My fiancé never wanted me to meet his parents, and when I finally did, I was stunned by the truth. I stood in the living room of two strangers as Walter Ostraki suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest. His wife, Dolores, screamed his name again and again while I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands and struggling to remember the address I had only seen once on an envelope. Within 7 minutes, an ambulance arrived at the small blue house in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, along with 2 FBI agents. The man I was supposed to marry in 6 weeks was not who he claimed to be, and the people he had spent 2.5 years painting as dangerous, alcoholic monsters were nothing like that. Walter and Dolores Ostraki were not the villains of his story, they were his victims, just like me. My name is Hannah Calderon. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a dental hygienist at a small family practice in Scranton, Pennsylvania. For the last 11 years, I've been cleaning teeth and pretending to believe patients when they swear they floss every day. I'm good at my job. I used to think I was good at reading people too. I was wrong. I met Garrett Ostraki at a friend's birthday party in March 2021. He was tall, dark-haired, and confident without being arrogant. He laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones. He remembered little details about my life that I had only mentioned once. He brought me soup when I was sick and flowers for no reason. After 6 months of dating, I thought I had finally found the right man. After a year, I was certain. After 2 years, he proposed with a ring he had secretly designed based on a vintage style I once admired in a magazine. He paid attention. He cared. At least, that's what I believed. There was only one thing about Garrett that felt off, and he had such a convincing explanation that I accepted it without question. He refused to introduce me to his parents. Not that he wasn't ready. He flat out refused. The first time I asked, about 4 months into our relationship, his whole expression changed. His eyes went distant, like he was looking straight into some painful memory. He told me his parents were severe alcoholics. He said they had chosen vodka over their own son when he was 19. He said he hadn't had a real relationship with them in 15 years, and that asking him to reconnect would be like forcing him to reopen the worst wound of his life. Those were his exact words, the worst wound of my life. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I'd seen addiction destroy families. My uncle Gary had spent 20 years cycling in and out of rehab before finally getting sober at 53. I knew some family relationships were too broken to repair. So I let it go. I told myself I was being supportive. I told myself I was respecting his boundaries. My mother, Patrice Calderon, wasn't nearly as understanding. From the very first dinner where I brought Garrett home, she watched him the way a hawk watches a field mouse. She smiled. She was polite. But after he left, she sat me down in the kitchen with 2 cups of chamomile tea and said something I never forgot. A man who hides his family is hiding something else. Hannah, mark my words. I told her she was being paranoid. I accused her of judging someone she barely knew. I said not everyone came from a family like ours, which was unfair. Because our family isn't perfect either. We had our first real argument in years. She said she was trying to protect me. I told her I didn't need protection from a man who treated me better than anyone ever had. We didn't speak for almost 2 weeks. Looking back, I wish I had listened, but hindsight is cruel like that. It becomes perfectly clear only when it's too late to change anything. When Garrett proposed, he made one thing very clear: the wedding would be small. Just us and your family, he said. I don't need anyone from my past. You're my future. At the time, it sounded romantic. He didn't want a huge wedding, a giant guest list, or some over-the-top spectacle. He just wanted me. But little things started bothering me. Small details I kept brushing aside because I didn't want to see what they might mean. Garrett worked from home as a financial consultant. He had flexible hours, took calls behind closed doors, and never really explained his job in a way that made sense. When I asked, he used phrases like portfolio management and investment strategy for private clients. It sounded impressive. It also sounded vague. I work in dental hygiene, not finance. So I told myself I just didn't understand his world. Then there was the drinking. He never got falling down drunk, but alcohol was always there. Whiskey at 5 in the afternoon, wine with dinner, beer during the game, then another, then another. For someone who claimed to be deeply traumatized by alcoholic parents, he seemed awfully comfortable with a glass in his hand. I mentioned it once, gently, and he laughed it off. Social drinking isn't addiction, babe. I know my limits. And, once again, I let it go. I had become very good at that. Wedding planning didn't help. I've learned that the words simple and wedding do not belong in the same sentence unless the universe is in the mood for a joke. The second you say, I want something small, someone hands you a catalog with 17 shades of white napkins and asks which one matches your vision. We booked the Rise in Lackawanna station in Scranton, a beautiful historic venue, and the dinner package cost $347 per person, which, somehow, was considered reasonable. My mother offered to help pay, which also meant she offered to have opinions about everything. Still, through all the stress and planning and debates over napkins, one thought kept tugging at me. In 6 weeks, I would marry a man whose parents wouldn't be there, whose friends wouldn't be there, whose entire past remained locked behind a door he refused to open. 3 weeks before the wedding, something happened that finally made me turn that handle, and what I found on the other side changed everything. It started with a phone call that wasn't meant for me. Garrett was in the shower, and his phone was buzzing nonstop on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, I was making coffee, and the thing kept vibrating across the granite like an angry insect. I glanced at the screen to see whether it might be urgent. The caller ID read, Wilkes-Barre Medical Center. I didn't answer, but when Garrett came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, I mentioned it casually. Hey, you got a bunch of missed calls from some medical center in Wilkes-Barre. Everything okay? I will never forget the look on his face. The color drained from it instantly, as if someone had pulled a plug. For maybe 2 seconds, he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Then he recovered, smiled, and said, probably a wrong number or spam. Those places are always calling about insurance scams. I nodded, let it go. But that night, lying awake beside him, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Wilkes-Barre was only about 35 minutes from Scranton. Garrett had always told me his parents lived in Columbus, Ohio, 7 hours away, in another state, in another life. So why would a hospital just down the road be calling him? After that, I started paying attention, not snooping through his phone, not digging through his things, just really paying attention for the first time. And I noticed more than I wanted to. His drinking was getting worse, slowly, but clearly. The 5 o'clock whiskey became 4 o'clock. The one beer turned into 3 or 4. One afternoon, I opened the trunk of his car to toss in my gym bag and found a half-empty bottle of Jameson wrapped in a towel and hidden behind the spare tire. The sight of it hit me like a punch. He had spent years telling me his parents were ruined by alcohol, using that story to keep me away from them, and now he was secretly hiding whiskey in his car. I told myself he was under stress, wedding planning, work pressure. People cope in different ways. Then came the money. One Tuesday evening, I logged into our joint savings account, the account we had opened for our future, for a house, for the life we were building together. We had been contributing to it for over a year. There should have been $34,000 in it. There was $26,000. $8,000 was gone. When I asked Garrett about it, carefully and without accusation, he was perfectly smooth. Oh, babe, I moved it into an investment opportunity, short term. A buddy of mine had this deal, and I couldn't pass it up. It'll triple in 6 months, I promise. No paperwork, no details, no name, just trust me. And somehow, I still did. Then, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I was searching for my passport for our Costa Rica honeymoon. I found it in Garrett's closet, inside a box of important documents. But I found something else too, an old photograph tucked inside a shoebox behind his winter boots. In the photo, a younger Garrett, maybe 22 or 23, stood between a smiling man and woman at what was clearly a graduation ceremony. He wore a cap and gown. Behind them hung a banner that read Bloomsburg University. I turned the photo over. Written in neat cursive on the back were the words, Garrett's graduation day, Bloomsburg University, 2011. We're so proud of you. Love always, Mom and Dad. I stared at that picture for a long time. The woman had kind eyes and a warm, open smile. The man had his arm around Garrett's shoulders with unmistakable pride. These were not the faces of people who had abandoned their child in favor of alcohol. They looked like ordinary, loving parents, the kind of people who might alphabetize their spice rack for fun. When Garrett came home that night, I showed him the photo. I was careful, gentle, trying not to sound accusing. I just asked about it. His eyes immediately filled with tears. He told me the picture was from before his parents got bad. He said it hurt to look at because it reminded him of who they used to be before alcohol destroyed them. He said he kept it hidden because he couldn't bear to look at it, but couldn't bring himself to throw it away either. Then he looked at me with those wet, wounded eyes and said, "You're just like everyone else, Hannah. You don't believe me. You think I'm inventing my own trauma." I felt ashamed, small, heartless. I apologized. I hugged him. I put the photo back exactly where I found it and promised myself I would never doubt him again. That promise lasted 4 days. My mother called on a Thursday evening, her voice carrying that tone all children recognize instantly, the one that means she has done something she knows I'm going to hate. "Hannah, I need you to listen before you get angry." She had run a background check on Garrett using one of those online services. She said she hadn't been able to sleep, and that her instincts wouldn't leave her alone. What she found, she said, didn't make sense. There were address gaps, employment inconsistencies, and something labeled a possible alias flag. "Hannah," she said, "I really think you need to see this." I exploded. I accused her of trying to ruin my happiness because she couldn't stand the fact that I was building a life with someone she had never approved of. I told her that if she couldn't support my marriage, maybe she shouldn't come to the wedding at all. We didn't speak for 5 days. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the doubt she planted had already taken root. That Friday night, lying beside Garrett while he snored softly in his sleep, I made a decision. If he wouldn't introduce me to his parents, I would introduce myself. Whatever I found, alcoholics, hostile strangers, broken people, at least I would know the truth. I just had no idea how devastating that truth would be. If you want, I can keep rewriting the next part in the same style. "He sat exactly where you're sitting now," Walter said, his voice heavy, and told us he was in terrible trouble. The story came out in fragments, with Walter and Dolores finishing each other's sentences as if they had practiced it, but I knew they hadn't. They had simply repeated it to each other so many times over the years, trying to understand it, trying to make sense of it, that it had hardened into something like a script. Garrett had told them he had witnessed something horrific, a crime tied to organized crime. He claimed, because of what he knew, he had been placed in witness protection and had to disappear completely. For their safety, and for his own, they had to believe he was dead. No phone calls, no letters, no contact of any kind. He cried while he told them. He held his mother. He said he loved them. He told them it was the hardest thing he had ever done. And then he asked them for money. Survival money, Dolores said, her voice hollow. That's what he called it. Money so he could survive while he was hiding. Walter rose slowly and crossed the room to a small desk in the corner. From one of the drawers, he pulled out a thick folder, worn at the edges and bound with a rubber band. He carried it back carefully and placed it in front of me. "I kept everything," he said, "every wire transfer, every statement, every receipt, because part of me kept hoping there would be an explanation, that one day our boy would come back and tell us it had all been necessary, that he never had any other choice." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside was a record of ruin. Wire transfers from 2021, more from 2022, more again from 2023. At first, the amounts were smaller, $2,000 here, $3,000 there. Then they grew larger, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 at a time. On the inside cover, written neatly in Walter's careful handwriting, was the final total. $215,847. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. "Your retirement," I whispered. "All of it," Walter said, $168,000. Every cent we saved in 40 years of work. And when that was gone, Dolores added softly, "We refinanced the house, took out a second mortgage, another $47,000. I looked around at the house, the ceramic frog on the porch, The rose garden outside. The cheerful mat that said bless this home. They were going to lose all of it. Not because of bad luck. Not because of some random misfortune. Because their own son had stripped them bare. I thought that had to be the worst part. It wasn't. He told us why he had to disappear, Walter said. He looked straight at me, and there was something in his eyes that made my stomach drop before he even spoke again. He told us it was because of you. I stared at him. What? His girlfriend, Walter said. That's what he called you. He said she was tied to dangerous people. He said he had to disappear to protect both of you, but he needed money to start over somewhere safe. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. My fingers dug into the edge of the table. For 3 years, Dolores said, tears gathering in her eyes. I hated a woman I had never met. I blamed her for taking my son away from us. I prayed for that woman every night, and not kindly. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. And that woman was you, she whispered. You were being lied to just like we were. I couldn't breathe. The man I had planned to marry had invented a poisoned version of me for his parents while playing perfect fiancé to my face. He had turned us all into characters in whatever story was most useful to him. My mother used to joke that I had terrible taste in men. I always thought she was exaggerating. Turns out, she was being merciful. Walter pulled one more document from the folder and slid it toward me. It was a power of attorney form. At the bottom were his and Dolores's signatures, supposedly giving Garrett control over their finances while he was in hiding. Check the date, Walter said. I looked down. The notary's stamp was from April 2022, more than 6 months after Garrett had supposedly vanished and been declared dead to them. We never signed it, Dolores said. I had never even seen that paper until today. Those signatures aren't ours. Forgery, fraud, theft, manipulation. He had forged legal authority over his parents' finances and used it to keep bleeding them dry. That wasn't just betrayal. That was criminal. Then something clicked in my head. A few weeks ago, I said slowly, Garrett got repeated calls from Wilkes-Barre Medical Center. He told me it was spam, said it was probably a wrong number. Walter and Dolores exchanged a look that hollowed me out. I had a heart scare last month, Dolores said quietly. An irregular heartbeat. They kept me overnight at Wilkes-Barre General for observation. Walter swallowed hard. I found an old number for him in my phone. I knew it probably wouldn't matter. I knew it was foolish. But I thought, if there was even the smallest chance he might answer, if there was some way he could know his mother was in the hospital. I called every day for a week. He finished, his voice breaking. Garrett had seen those calls. He had seen the hospital name light up his phone while his mother lay in a hospital bed. And he had done nothing. No call back, no concern, no hesitation. He had simply told me it was spam and gone right back to planning our wedding. That was the moment Walter broke. I saw it happen in real time, as though something inside him finally gave way. 3 years of denial, 3 years of excuses, 3 years of trying to believe there had to be some reason, some explanation. Some version of events in which his son was still salvageable. There wasn't. There was no explanation, no good reason, no hidden nobility waiting at the end of the story. His son was a monster. Walter pushed back from the table too quickly. He stood, swayed, and knocked his chair over as he reached for the counter. Walter. Dolores shot to her feet. Walter, what's wrong? He pressed a hand to his chest. His face had gone gray. Sweat already gathering on his forehead. Can't breathe right, he gasped, chest tight. Then he collapsed. He hit the kitchen floor hard. Dolores dropped to her knees beside him, screaming his name over and over. I was already moving, already pulling out my phone, my fingers finding 911 before I even realized what I was doing. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. A 68-year-old man is having severe chest pain and trouble breathing. He may be having a heart attack. Address? I looked around frantically, spotted an envelope on the counter, and read it out loud. 247 Maple Ridge Lane, Wilkes-Barre, please hurry. 7 minutes. That's how long it took the ambulance to arrive. 7 minutes that felt like 7 years. Walter lay on the kitchen floor, struggling for every breath, while Dolores clutched his hand and sobbed. I tried to remember every scrap of emergency first aid I had ever learned. Keep him still. Loosen his collar. Keep him talking. Keep him conscious. Stay with me, Mr. Ostraki, I said over and over. Help is coming. Just breathe. In and out. That's it. In and out. When the ambulance finally pulled into the driveway, I nearly cried with relief. 2 EMTs rushed inside and took over immediately, kneeling beside Walter with the calm, practiced speed of people used to chaos. And then I noticed something strange. Another car had pulled up behind the ambulance, a dark blue sedan. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both dressed in business casual instead of medical uniforms. The woman reached into her jacket and flashed a badge. The EMTs were loading Walter onto a stretcher when the 2 strangers stepped into the house. FBI, the man said, holding up his identification. I'm Agent Reyes. This is Agent Whitmore. We're here to speak with Walter and Dolores Ostraki. Dolores turned from the stretcher, wild-eyed and shaking. That's my husband they're taking out of here. What do you want? What is happening? Agent Whitmore stepped forward, palms raised in a calming gesture. Ma'am, we're not here to make things worse. We've been investigating a financial fraud case, and your family came up in that investigation. We just need to ask a few questions. Then Agent Reyes looked at me. And you are? My mouth had gone dry. Hannah Calderon, I said. I'm engaged to their son, Garrett Ostraki. The 2 agents exchanged a look. A loaded look. The kind that tells you they know something you don't, and whatever it is will blow your life apart. Agent Reyes turned back to me carefully. Ma'am, he said, there is no Garrett Ostraki, not legally. The room was already spinning, but somehow it spun faster. The man you know as Garrett Ostraki is actually Garrett Brennan Walchak. He is wanted in New Jersey and Delaware on charges including wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. We've been tracking him for nearly 2 years. I heard the words. I understood them. But my mind refused to accept them. Garrett wasn't even Garrett. The name, the history, the man I had loved, none of it was real. We need to get my husband to the hospital, Dolores said, panic rising in her voice. Please, can this wait? Of course, Agent Whitmore said gently. Go with him, we'll follow. But Miss Calderon, she looked at me, we need to talk. The next few hours blurred together like a nightmare. Walter was taken to Wilkes-Barre General. Dolores rode with him in the ambulance, gripping his hand the whole way. I followed in my car, and the FBI followed behind me. It felt like some grim little procession no one had asked to join. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Walter had suffered stress-induced angina, not a full heart attack, thank God, but serious enough to require treatment, monitoring, and medication. The shock of learning the truth about his son had literally sent him to a hospital bed. While Dolores stayed with Walter, I sat in a small conference room with Agents Reyes and Whitmore. They had coffee. I had 1,000 questions. Tell me everything, I said. I need to know who I've been living with. Agent Reyes opened a folder. By then I was beginning to hate folders, and spread several photographs across the table. Garrett's face stared back at me from different years, different angles, under different names. Driver's licenses from 3 states, 3 identities, 1 predator. Garrett Brennan Walchak, Reyes said, born in Newark, New Jersey, in 1989. He started with smaller financial scams in his early 20s, fake investment opportunities, false business loans. Then he found a more reliable target. Family, Agent Whitmore said, usually his own. They explained that the pattern was always the same. Garrett would get involved with a woman, someone kind, trusting, and unlikely to question him too closely. He would isolate her from his family with stories about abuse, addiction, or estrangement. While she stayed focused on the relationship, he went after the real targets, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone with savings or property. He tells them he's in crisis, Reyes said, witness protection, dangerous enemies, medical emergencies. The details change, but the outcome doesn't. They empty their accounts trying to save him. By the time they realize the truth, he's gone. New city, New name. New victim. How many? I asked. How many before Walter and Dolores? 3 confirmed families. Whitmore said. More than $600,000 in losses before the Ostrakis. More than $600,000. And then Walter and Dolores on top of that. More than $800,000 stolen from people who loved him. Whitmore slid another photograph toward me. It showed an elderly woman with silver hair and a soft smile. The kind of smile that made you think of Christmas cards and warm kitchens. Gladys Morrow, she said quietly, 78 years old, lived in Trenton, New Jersey. Garrett posed as her grandson after her real grandson died in a car accident in 2015. He stepped into the dead man's identity and convinced her he was still family. My stomach turned. She gave him everything. Whitmore continued. Savings, jewelry, her house, everything. What happened to her? Whitmore's expression tightened. She died 18 months ago. Stroke. Alone in a state-run care facility after she had nothing left. She died believing her grandson hated her. Because once the money was gone, he stopped visiting. I bent forward, head between my knees, fighting a wave of nausea. The man who brought me flowers. The man who held me when I cried. The man who told me he couldn't wait to spend forever with me. He had let an old woman die believing she was unloved. Miss Calderon, Agent Reyes said gently, we need your help. Anything, I said immediately, whatever you need. They already had enough to arrest him, more than enough, but they wanted something airtight. They wanted him recorded, speaking in his own voice, digging his hole deeper so there would be no easy defense later. You have a wedding cake tasting on Monday afternoon, Agent Whitmore said, at the Risen-Lackawanna station in Scranton, 2:15? Yes. We want you wired. Go to the appointment, act normal, get him talking, about the money, about the accounts, about your plans. We'll have agents throughout the building. Once we have what we need, we move. They wanted me to live with him for 3 more days. Sleep beside him. Smile at him. Pretend I didn't know that every piece of him was a lie. Can you do that? Agent Reyes asked. I thought of Walter in a hospital bed, Dolores crying in that kitchen, Gladys Morrow dying alone because a monster had stolen not just her money, but her dignity and her last piece. Yes, I said, I can do it. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Garrett came home Sunday night cheerful and relaxed from his so-called conference. He kissed me at the door, asked if I'd had a nice weekend, and told me he'd missed me. I smiled and lied right back, said I'd just run a few wedding errands, asked about the conference. He invented stories about panels and networking dinners that probably never happened. That night we watched a comedy I couldn't follow. He laughed in all the right places. I laughed a few beats later, hoping he wouldn't notice. We went to bed. He fell asleep within minutes. I lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and counting down the hours. Monday morning, he picked out my dress for the tasting, a blue one he always said was his favorite. You look beautiful, babe, he said, adjusting my collar with those gentle hands. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Ready to choose our wedding cake? The drive to the Risen took 22 minutes. Garrett chatted the whole way about cake flavors, raspberry filling, vanilla buttercream, maybe lemon instead. I nodded at the right moments. The wire taped against my chest felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The tasting room was elegant, all white tablecloths and polished glassware, with plates of cake samples arranged like art. Deborah, the cheerful catering manager, welcomed us and launched into the options with bright enthusiasm. Red velvet, lemon chiffon, chocolate ganache. Garrett sampled each bite thoughtfully, discussing flavor and presentation like a man planning the happiest day of his life. I did exactly what the FBI needed me to do. Babe, I said lightly, lifting a forkful of carrot cake. I've been thinking about that $8,000 you moved. You never really explained the investment. What kind of return are we talking about? Garrett smiled. Don't stress about it, Hannah. I've got everything under control. By the time we're back from Costa Rica, that money will have doubled. I know. I just want to understand our finances better, since we're about to be married. He launched into one of his polished little speeches, vague jargon mixed with confident numbers, fake explanations. Real account details, enough to bury himself. Then I saw Agent Reyes appear in the doorway. Behind him stood Agent Whitmore. Behind them, 2 uniformed officers. Garrett noticed them half a second later. His fork froze in midair. "Garrett Walchak," Agent Reyes said, his voice sharp against the soft music in the room. "You are under arrest. Put your hands behind your back." Garrett's face transformed in a flash, confusion, then recognition, then fear, and finally something cold and stripped bare. The real man underneath the charm. He ran. Or tried to. He got 4 steps. Agent Whitmore slammed him to the ground, pinning him face first into the cream-colored carpet with practiced force. Deborah dropped a plate of red velvet samples, and the crash of porcelain sounded absurdly theatrical in the silence. Garrett twisted his head enough to look at me, his cheek pressed into the floor. "Hannah, baby, this is a mistake. Whatever they told you, whatever you think you know." I looked down at him. At the stranger I had almost married. "The only mistake," I said, "was thinking you were human." They hauled him upright, read him his rights, and marched him out in handcuffs past the staff, the guests, the bright hotel lobby, and the remains of a wedding that was never going to happen. I stood alone in the tasting room, surrounded by half-eaten cake and the wreckage of a life that had never really existed. The wedding was over, obviously. But the story didn't end there. The trial took 8 months. Garrett Brennan Walchak, his real name still made me sick, was charged with 47 federal counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, elder exploitation across 3 states, plus additional charges tied to the forged power of attorney documents. At first he tried to fight it, hired an expensive lawyer, almost certainly paid for with stolen money, but the evidence was crushing: wire transfers, bank records, forged signatures, my recording from the wire, and testimony from multiple families whose lives he had gutted. 3 months before trial, he changed his plea to guilty. His lawyer called it accepting responsibility. I called it realizing he had no way out. The sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday morning in March. The courtroom was packed. I was there. Walter and Dolores were there too, Walter leaning on a cane now, his heart still healing, but strong enough to sit there and watch justice finally catch up to his son. Other victims were there in person, and some appeared by video from New Jersey and Delaware. One by one, people told the court what Garrett had done to them. Savings gone. Homes lost. Families turned against each other. One woman spoke about how Garrett had manipulated her mother and sister until neither of them trusted the other anymore. Another talked about discovering her father had secretly taken out loans to keep feeding Garrett's lies. Then came Gladys Morrow's niece, Patricia. She wasn't there in person, but she submitted a written statement, and the judge read part of it aloud. She said her aunt had died alone, confused, abandoned in a facility after being stripped of everything she owned. She said Gladys deserved better. She was right. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I thought I was planning a wedding, I said. Instead, I learned the man I loved didn't exist. He was a role, a story, a performance built to exploit trust. I lost 2.5 years. Walter and Dolores lost their retirement. Gladys Morrow lost far more than money. I hope this court gives him enough time to think about what he has done. The judge was not merciful. 14 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for 11 years. Restitution of $847,000. Everyone knew the victims would probably see only a small fraction of that money again, but still, hearing the number out loud mattered. It was a record of the damage, a formal acknowledgement of all he had taken. When the sentence was announced, Garrett barely reacted. He stared straight ahead, expressionless, like he was already working on his next lie in his head. I hoped prison might change him. I doubted it. Either way, he was no longer my problem. The FBI recovered $67,000 from accounts he had hidden under various aliases. Most of it went to Gladys Morrow's estate. Patricia used it to cover debts Gladys had accumulated in her final years. The remaining funds were divided among the other victims. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. So the community stepped in. I organized a fundraiser through the dental office where I worked. Dr. Morrison let us use the waiting room for an entire weekend. We set out donation jars, shared a GoFundMe, and spread the story through town. My mother's church took up a special collection. Small businesses in Wilkes-Barre donated what they could. In just 3 weeks, we raised $43,000. I drove to 247 Maple Ridge Lane on a Saturday morning and handed Walter Ostraki the check myself. He looked at it for a long time. Then he cried. Later, Dolores told me that in 40 years of marriage she had only seen her husband cry 3 times, when his mother died, when Garrett told them he was dead, and the day I handed him that check. "We can keep the house," Walter said, his voice breaking. "Dolly, we can keep the house." I wanted to tell them it was nothing. But that wouldn't have been true. Not everyone would have done it. I did it because I cared about these 2 people who had started as strangers and somehow become family on the worst day of my life. The wedding at the Risen was cancelled, of course. I lost my deposit, $3,000 gone. My mother offered to pay me back. I told her to donate it instead to a charity that helps elderly fraud victims. She did. Then she added another $500 of her own. As for my mother, she has been absolutely unbearable ever since. Every phone call contains some variation of, "I tried to tell you about that man." Every family dinner somehow circles back to, "Remember when I suggested that background check?" Finally I said, "Mom, you were right. Please, for the love of God, stop enjoying it so much." She has not stopped. Honestly, she earned that one. These days, my Sundays look different. I drive to Wilkes-Barre, to that powder blue house with the ceramic frog on the porch and roses blooming in the yard. I have lunch with Walter and Dolores, usually pierogi, which Dolores has been teaching me to make, although mine still come out lopsided and sad compared to hers. We watch Jeopardy! At 7. We talk about nothing important and everything important. Sometimes my mother comes too. She and Dolores have become friends, bonded by a shared belief that children never listen to good advice until disaster forces them to. They swap recipes, trade stories, and gently gang up on me whenever the opportunity presents itself. Walter calls me the daughter we always wanted. The first time he said it, I cried. The second time, I laughed. Now it just feels true. I went looking for a husband. Instead, I found a family. I haven't dated anyone since Garrett, not because I'm terrified, although maybe a small part of me still is. Mostly, I'm just not in a hurry anymore. I spent 2.5 years building a future with a man who was never real. I'm done rushing, done dismissing red flags because I want the story to work out. When the right person comes, if he comes, I'll know. And next time, when my mother offers to run a background check, I'll say yes. Some people hide their families because those relationships are painful, broken, or unsafe. That's real. Addiction, abuse, and estrangement are real. Sometimes walking away is the healthiest thing a person can do. But sometimes people hide their families because their families know exactly who they are. If someone you love refuses to let you meet the people who raised them, don't ignore the question of why. Pay attention. Trust yourself when something feels off. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully it's buried. For me, it led to a small blue house in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, on a Friday morning when I pulled into the driveway with a cracked windshield and a heart full of dread. And once that truth came out, it changed everything. I can also make this more dramatic, more concise, or more natural, realistic depending on the style you want.